Hi everyone, welcome back to No Fixed Address. This is Teo, your host, and happy Halloween weekend. I don't actually know when this episode is going to be posted, so if Halloween weekend has already passed, then I hope you had an amazing time. Also, welcome to any first time listeners. Thank you so much for being here with us and giving my podcast a try. Just a quick overview of the podcast. Here we talk about what it's like moving away from home, starting fresh, and what it means to live between two homes and finding a place where you really belong. Last week, I talked about all the culture shocks that I've had ever since moving to the US 2 years ago. So I thought it would be kind of fun, kind of as a spin off to last week's episode, to have a video where we talk about kind of reverse culture shocks. And what I kind of mean by that is what happens when you go back home and everything feels differently than it did before. So I thought I'd start the episode just by talking about my experience of going back home for the first time after being away. And I'm going to preface this by saying that yes, I've had like 5 months in this new place before going back home, but in retrospect, 5 months is not that long of a time. So I was still feeling kind of lost. I kind of found my footing, but not to the point of like feeling super comfortable in this new place that I was in. And so I built this image in my head of, my arrival back home to Romania. And I had this like huge emotional picture in my head. And I imagine, getting out of the airport, seeing my family, hugging everybody, just like, those final scenes in a movie at the end where everybody's just like super happy. And like, that's just kind of what I built in my head. That's what I imagined, this moment to be like. And yes, you guys can tell me I set myself up for failure. I found that out. Don't worry. And like, don't get me wrong. Getting back home, it was still beautiful. I got really emotional seeing my family again and just, being back in a place where I thought that I belonged. But I realized pretty fast that it kind of felt off. I would be hanging out with friends or even my family. And, I was really excited to be there and see them after not being able to for such a long time. But there's this constant feeling of something that just felt off, when you have like a pit in your stomach and you can just tell that the vibe is weird. That's kind of how I kept feeling. And I kept trying to figure out what was wrong. I honestly, for a bit, thought I might have been sick from all the traveling and the jet lag. But I did realize kind of quickly that I wasn't sick. I was just feeling like the city that I grew up with just felt so small all of a sudden. And the streets that I used to take every day for school in middle school or high school, they just kind of felt quieter. And it was really weird because even my favorite foods, they tasted nostalgic, but they didn't taste how I expected them to. And so, like, I kept having this thought of, like, what's wrong with me? And it wasn't that any of the places that I used to frequent changed drastically, maybe little changes here and there. But I realized that I was the one that changed. And, now in retrospect, it seems so obvious, right? But in the moment, it took me a bit to realize that the rhythm of the new life that I was living abroad was just different. The routines, the pace, also the independence of not living with my parents anymore. All these little things changed me. Maybe in small ways, maybe in big ways, it depends who you're going to ask. But I realized that trying to slip back into my old life wasn't as easy as I thought it was going to be. Again, I imagined myself just coming back and being, the same exact person that I was before I left, which was impossible. I noticed that even when hanging out with my friends, the feeling is crazy, but I would just stand there and they would be talking about these things that I hadn't experienced because I was away, these inside jokes that I couldn't get because I was missing the context. It really made me feel sad, but also just distanced from everything that up to that point I assumed was going to be familiar to me. And what's crazy about all of it was that in the moment, I was realizing these changes, but they were subtle. It's not like I landed and immediately felt like the vibe was off. Like, no, I would be having a conversation with someone, and in the middle of it, I would be like, wait, what are you talking about? Or I would just like kind of be walking down the streets a few days later and I'd be like, this kind of feels different than what I'm used to now because the places are not the same. And it's in the small moments of trying to explain my daily life to my family. And, halfway through, we're already kind of talking about things that are more local. And it's not like it's on purpose or they're doing it intentionally. It's just there's some feelings and experiences that they simply can't relate to because they haven't been through what I've been through. And also, of course, there's the moments where I can tell that these new habits that I've picked up stand out. I would say the biggest one is probably just being in a conversation with someone and finding it so hard to find the right words in my native language just because the first instinct is for me to speak English now, just because I do it so much when I'm here in the US. And it's also in the way that I order my coffee. I've realized that ever since I moved here, every time I go to a coffee shop and I order a coffee, I now do the like little changes of like, oh, can I have this syrup and this? And before, I generally didn't do that. And also, sometimes my humor doesn't land the same way that it used to before. Like, for example, one night I was out with an old friend and I told a story about something that happened while I was away at uni here in the US. And at the end of it, there was just kind of like an awkward like laugh and pause, not because it was a bad story or anything. It was just because it didn't translate. Like what I found funny over here and the humor that I have over here doesn't translate the same way in Romanian, for example. And the culture references, for example, as well, they just don't hit over there because it's different. And I just remember thinking like, wow, I'm a foreign here now. And that's when the emotional part starts creeping in. Because as I said earlier, it's not necessarily sadness because I'm really excited about the person that I get to be because of the experiences that I have when I'm abroad. It just feels more like dissonance. Like I would feel so grateful to be home because, to be honest, once it hits like mid-November, I am missing home like crazy. So I'd be so grateful to be back. But I also felt a bit like a stranger in a place that I assumed and I thought that was supposed to feel easy to me, kind of just like, riding a bicycle when you haven't for the last 6 months or so. I would say that kind of along with that, there's guilt that comes with it just because I keep thinking like, wow, I'm not grateful enough to be back. Like I should feel more happy and more connected. But the truth is, it's okay to miss home and love where you came from and still feel disconnected from it sometimes. Because being away for uni or for a job or anything that might have had you move away, it adds new layers of identity. There's experiences that you have that don't just, disappear the moment you get back to your home city or your childhood home. They shape in a new way how you see everything about your life. And again, don't get me wrong, I was really excited to be back, but I noticed how fast I kind of started missing small things from life abroad here at uni. I realized that I was missing the independence, because when I'm home, I'm back with living with my parents. So I would have my dad text me at like 10 p.m. when I'm out with my friends, being like, "Oh, when are you getting home?" And it's just such a stark difference from being over here and just kind of living on my own and being able to be out until 3, 4 a.m. doing whatever and have no one text me just because, no one's expecting me back. and also other stuff like that. There's small things that I started to miss about my life in Chicago. And it made me realize how much the experiences that I've had here changed my sense of comfort. And now a few years have passed since I went back home for the first time after studying abroad. And in these years, I've, traveled back and forth from the US and Romania. And I've realized that these reverse culture shocks aren't about losing my roots. It's about realizing that they've grown in new directions. And isn't that an exciting thought to have? And this kind of brings us back to that idea of just redefining home because it's something way more flexible now. It stops being the single place on a map and it's more like a collection of connections with people, habits, moments. It's in the way that my mom still makes me pancakes on weekend mornings. It's late night calls with friends that are across different time zones. And, it's even in airports, as much as I hate them sometimes, and playlists that remind me of someplace else. And that's also the thing about living in between cultures or places. It's that you never really lose a home. You just keep building new ones. And sometimes the challenge is not to choose between them, but to accept that you belong to all of them at once. And to be honest, I think there's something powerful about noticing these little changes that you've made in your identity and what kind of sticks with you after you've moved back. Maybe it's a word that you can't stop using, or a new mindset about your freedom, or even honestly, the confidence that you've gained from starting over and starting fresh in a new place. And, the fact that you're strong enough to have built new connections wherever you might go. And again, since having my first experience with reverse culture shocks, I've traveled back and forth between Romania and here a few times already. But I've realized that these reverse culture shocks, they kind of eventually fade. But what kind of stays after is this awareness that you're capable of adapting over and over again as many times as you want to. And I think that adaptability and the sense of kind of like a global belonging that you have becomes one of your strongest traits. Because how many people can say they've had the guts to go away from home and study someplace else where they didn't know anybody? And you kind of realize that home, again, is no longer just a place that defines you, but it's something that you get to carry with you. And when I say carrying your home with you everywhere, I don't mean just memories. For me, for example, it's things like holding the door open for someone behind me or catching myself thinking in a different language. These little things remind me that I've changed and I've learned to be okay with that. And again, sometimes this awareness hits you in the strangest moments, like walking past a familiar street and realizing that the nostalgia that I'm feeling isn't for the place itself, but for the version of me that used to live on those streets. Or when a song comes on from playlists that I've made with my friends that now live across the globe, and they've introduced me to these songs, and just listening those first few notes, it just takes me back to a different city and a different life that makes me feel both happy for everything that I've had the opportunity to live through, but it also makes me feel a bit out of place. And I've also realized that carrying home also means carrying people that I love with me. And I don't mean that as in make them really small and put them in my pocket and just travel around with them, but in the way that they know my story and they know everything that I'm going through, even though they're not literally next to me anymore. And it also means like the family that checks in with you, even if, it's 2 a.m. for them, but you're going through a tough time and you just need someone to talk to. They kind of become your anchors, I would say. And I really appreciate having them with me everywhere I go. And it is kind of magical, I'll say, realizing that you don't need to be in just one place to feel grounded because home becomes flexible and something you can take with you anywhere. And it's not just something that keeps you in one spot. So I hope that eventually you'll start embracing these in between moments that you have, whether it's a layover at, a new airport or the drive that you have to make to get back home from uni. They all become part of your story and they remind you that home is a feeling that you learn to carry with you wherever you go. And I feel like I need to include this in this episode just because it was kind of what I was thinking of when I came up with the idea of talking about these reverse culture shocks. I assume most of you guys might know this, but the quote from Winnie the Pooh that says, "How lucky I am to have something that makes saying goodbye so hard." And again, I feel like this quote is what this episode is at its core. It's what defines everything that I've talked about today. And so, as I wrap this up, I just want to say if you're listening to this and you're someone that has gone through this weird in between stage, or maybe you're realizing that you're going through it like right now, I want you to know that it's not a failure. So, please remember this. It's a sign that you've grown. And isn't that so exciting? As always, thank you so much for listening. This was No Fixed Address, and I'm Teo. If you want to share your own stories or you maybe just want to connect, follow the podcast page on Instagram at nofixedaddress.podcast. And if it's one thing that I want you to remember, it's that it's okay if home doesn't feel like one fixed address anymore. It just means that your world got a little bigger. And I am so happy for you that it did. So thank you guys so much for listening again. And I'll see you all next time. Bye.